We pulled back carefully the clothing, and on her left arm, right thumb, and then again on her left shoulder, there were these amazing tattoos. Creatures just in immediate action poses, and they're in fact twisted oddly at 180-degree angles. They have amazing horns that end in flowers, fantastic creatures. At that point, the whole dig stopped and people came down and everyone was looking. Not only was this a woman, but one with tattoos, and they were quite elegant.
News of the tattooed woman quickly spread to other archaeologists in the region, including Natalia's husband. He came to witness the discovery.
У меня было два чувства. Я, конечно, очень хотел, чтобы Наташе повезло, но как профессионал, конечно, я испытывал некоторую зависть, потому что мне нечто похожее, конечно, тоже хотелось раскопать. А так мне, конечно, хотелось, чтобы ей повезло, и так вот действительно получилось.
Зависти не ощущалось.
Я ж в себе держал.
But removed from her frozen cocoon, the Ice Maiden started to decay. Natalia had to rush the body back to her institute. However, things did not go smoothly.
Мы перевозили ее вертолетом, естественно, потому что это очень быстро. Это всего 4 часа лета чистого. С посадками это 6 часов. Потому что у него отказал какой-то из двигателей. Он сделал вынужденную посадку.
Luckily, nothing happened. No one was hurt, and the body was still intact. But of course, that played into some of the myth that had been going about the camp throughout the summer, that she didn't like being disturbed.
Eventually, the Ice Maiden was safely back at Natalia's Institute of Archaeology in Akademgorodok. She was refrozen in a freezer, normally used for storing cheese. With spectacular tattoos and a grand burial, here was a woman with an important position in her society. The Ice Maiden was very different from previous Paseric bodies discovered in ice. Until the Ice Maiden, the most famous finds in the area had been made by Sergei Rudenko. In the 1920s, he uncovered dramatic evidence of the nomadic tribes that once lived here. He named them the Paseric, after the valley where he discovered their remains.
His was one of the most important discoveries this century in the context of archaeological discipline. He went to an area that had previously been unexplored, a difficult area high up in the mountains, and there discovered this Paseric culture.
Within the tombs, Rudenko found the preserved bodies of men and women, but unlike Natalia's find, the women were always buried alongside men.
Их сопровождали женщины, но это были женщины, которых называли наложницами. Это не свободные женщины. Это тех, которых умертвяли вместе с ними. А тут было захоронение свободной, настоящей такой пазарекской женщины, которая занимала выдающееся место в обществе. То есть это некая новая страница в истории пазарекской культуры.
The Paseric. For sure, they relied on the horse for transport, meat, and even milk, much as the inhabitants of the Altai do today. Many of the Altai people see themselves as the descendants of the Paseric and are taking a keen interest in the Ice Maiden's future. Science is now helping Natalia reveal more about this ancient woman and her culture, 2,500 years ago. What had she died of? How had the Pazyryk prepared her body for burial? She was 1 meter 70 in height, extremely tall for that time. From other tombs, it's evident that tall men were associated with the grandest burials. Here was a woman who was as tall as many of the powerful men. X-rays revealed nothing that could explain her cause of death, but there was a 4-centimeter hole in the back of her skull. To find out more, Natalia contacted a forensic pathologist in Switzerland. Rudolf Haury does 70 post-mortems a year. He usually performs them on behalf of the police. Here was an opportunity to help the archaeologists. He could tell if the hole in the Ice Maiden's skull was what had killed her or was made after death. It's all to do with the brittleness of bone. Before death, the skull is relatively flexible, but after death, the bone becomes brittle. Rudolf can demonstrate this with a real skull. A blow to it produces distinctive fracture lines.
You see the lines of fracture here in this example. That's like fractures of a clay pottery. And the same thing was on the Ice Maiden. So I'm sure it's post-mortem after death.
Rudolf believes the Ice Maiden died of natural causes. The hole in the skull was part of the embalming process, which preserved her body and gave it shape. Many of her organs had been cut out, including her womb, making it impossible to find out if the Ice Maiden had borne any children. But what the Pazyryk used to pack the body has allowed insight into their burial rites. Her skull was full of fur from a pine marten, her body stuffed with plant material.
We used peat and bark to put in the body because these two things help maybe preserve the body and the skin because it contains a lot of tannin.
The embalming explained a macabre curiosity Rudolf Haury had noticed in the eye orbits. The end of the optic nerve had been severed, probably with a knife. It could only mean that the eyes of the Ice Maiden had been cut out.
If you left the eyeballs inside of the orbits, they will lose water and they shrink together. That means that the eyelids fall inside the orbit. To prevent this, you have to take out the eyeball and to put something other inside there.
The embalming is uncannily similar to what Herodotus had described.
When their king dies, they take up the dead man, having coated it with wax, and open his belly, and cleaned it, and filled it with chopped marsh plants, and incense, and parsley seed, and anise, and sewn it together again.
From her skull, Rudolf could also tell her age at the time of death.
You see these lines on the skull, these fissures. These are widely open on this skull. That means the skull is young, it's perhaps between 20 and 30. After 30, there will be closing, and if someone is very old, 70 or 80, they're nearly closed and invisible. Our examinations of the skull of the Ice Maiden showed that we saw mainly open fissures, like here. It was comparable. That means she was between 20 and about 30, probably about 25.
This young woman was strikingly dressed. Particularly impressive was the meter-tall headdress which had taken up a third of the coffin, and a necklace of wooden camels. Animals were also used to decorate the headdress. A mystical griffin. All these carvings were originally coated in gold leaf.
Особенность этой находки нашей состоит в том, что он наконец-то впервые найден полностью, совершенно. И нам не надо что-то выдумывать и придумывать о том, как располагались все эти детали на головном уборе, потому что они уже были найдены на нем. Это был знак этой женщины. Он показывал ее место в обществе, ее род, племя. Все, что было на голове, должно быть было большим, высоким и как можно более заметным. Поэтому вот в том, что это сооружение было таким большим, Это буквально можно назвать сооружением. Нет ничего странного, это обычно.
Few garments so ancient have been so well preserved. Her thigh-length riding boots were made of felt, compressed sheep's wool. Her dress, woven from sheep's wool and camel hair, was held at the waist by a braided cord with tassels. It was banded in 3 colors, the red dye coming from an insect. And her delicate silk blouse was edged with maroon piping. Even after so long in the tomb, they needed remarkably little restoration to return them to how they must have looked when she wore them in life.
Этот костюм, который вы сейчас видите перед собой, это одна из самых древних достоверных находок одежды женщины скотоводческого общества, полный костюм. Здесь не приходится при реконструкции ничего